On the other hand, top-down processing is the result of context effects. Remember, it's when we use our background information, environmental context, our memories. We're already expecting what to see before we see it, and we use our previous knowledge to influence how we interpret what we're looking at now. This type of process is really useful in understanding speech. We know this because pure word deafness is an example of a lack of top-down processing in speech. It is when people can still distinguish what sounds are being said. They might even be able to repeat those sounds. They know what the sounds are, but they no longer know from a bigger picture what those sounds mean when they're put together. So when somebody with this condition hears someone speak, it's just sounds, just like when you hear a foreign language. They mean nothing to you. Even the person's own speech means nothing to them. So imagine if you're speaking with noise canceling headphones and you can't hear yourself speak. You can still decide what words to say and speak. It's going to be a little more difficult, but you can. Might be confusing not to be able to hear yourself. These people can hear themselves, but the words coming out of their mouth don't make any sense to them as they hear them. Now they're still able to speak them though. We use top-down processing a lot in reading as well. So this picture says, according to a research study at Cambridge University, it doesn't matter in what order the letters in a word are. The only important thing is that the first and last letter be in the right place. The rest can be a total mess and you can still read it without problem. This is because the human mind does not read every letter by itself, but the word as a whole. Now, if you did read every letter by itself and then identify the word, that would be bottom-up processing. But if you are a fluent reader, especially in your native language, and you don't have dyslexia or anything like that, you are kind of looking at the word as a whole and your mind fills in the gaps. And you probably notice that these words are messed up, but you can still read them. Facial recognition is another example of top-down processing. We do this with an area of the brain called the fusiform face area or the fusiform gyrus, which is kind of on the underside of your right frontal lobe that we use to help us identify faces, and we process them holistically. We actually do not recognize faces very well when we're using just pieces of them. When we only see a partial face, like one covered up with a mask, we're still kind of filling in the gaps and processing the face as a whole. So this helps us to process any objects that are organized in this T shape of having eyes oriented along a horizontal plane, a nose and mouth oriented along a vertical plane down the center. We're going to recognize that as a face, kind of like seeing an electrical outlet as a face, or plenty of other types of patterns on trees and stuff will look like faces even when there's not one there, because our pattern recognition system is so good at taking anything that's vaguely similar to that shape and just already understanding that it's a face. We're taking our previous knowledge of what a face shape should look like and applying that to what we see, not actually processing the details of what we see very much at all. Holistic face processing we can understand a little better by using the Margaret Thatcher illusion. So this is a picture. These are two upside down pictures of one of the previous prime ministers of the UK. One of these pictures has been edited, and I'd like for you to tell me which one is normal and which one is weird. Now, when I reveal it, it's pretty easy to see that the one on the right is horrifying. Her eyes and mouth have been edited so that they are upside down. But this is actually pretty tough to see when the faces are upside down. We recognize faces when they're in that upright T shape. We don't recognize faces well when they're upside down. Even if this were somebody you would recognize pretty well, like former President Obama or President Trump, you would have a hard time recognizing who they are upside down. We would also have a hard time telling that any of the features individually are out of place when we recognize them upside down. Now, some people actually do not fall for this illusion. So we fell for it if we could not tell which picture was weird. And digital editing makes this a lot easier, by the way. These edited photos were made with pretty old-fashioned technology, so you might tell that the eyes look kind of square-ish or something here and already point that one out as weird. But the newer digitally edited ones, it's pretty difficult to tell. So autistic people specifically, they have impaired face processing. They tend to not process faces in a top-down fashion, seeing the whole thing at once. And they also tend not to look at eyes very much. But they tend to process faces and also plenty of other patterns by looking at the details first. They tend to be much more detail-oriented. So they can actually much faster than a neurotypical person tell you which one of these pictures is off and tell you that the eyes and mouth are actually upside down, because that's how they recognize faces. They don't have the strong top-down processing holistically with the T shape. Instead, they look at individual features kind of one at a time and build that up into an understanding of the pattern of a face. So they were already looking at the eyes individually and the mouth individually to be able to tell that something was off about them. There are other conditions in which people have face recognition problems. When that's your only deficit, it's called prosopagnosia, also called face blindness. These people have the inability to recognize faces, and in the most severe cases, they can't even recognize themselves. You would have a much easier time walking into a funhouse mirror, for example, because you would be like, I would be like, who's that young woman? And I wouldn't recognize it as me. But they do recognize people by their voice, walking style, posture, sometimes a single distinctive feature. Sometimes they can use individual features like the autistic example that we just talked about. Some people also have visual agnosia for all other objects too, which means that everything they see would kind of just look like a soup of stuff, but you couldn't pick out what an object is or be able to name it. Other disorders include face recognition problems too. People with schizophrenia don't recognize faces as well as neurotypical people. Their fusiform face gyrus, or FFA, is smaller, and the smaller it is, the worse their recognition ability is. Now, in just prosopagnosia, that area is not necessarily smaller, it's usually damaged. People with autism also have similar face recognition problems. So if you just tested them with a recognition task, have you seen this face before? Have you seen this face before? Etc. You would find prosopagnosia, schizophrenia, autism, their performance might look the same as each other, but there's a different reason for it in the brain for each of these conditions. So in autism, the case is that the FFA is there, it's not damaged, it's not smaller or anything, but it is not selective for faces, meaning that it is not any more active when they look at faces compared to looking at any other objects. For most other people, your FFA is very, very active only when you look at faces and not so much when you look at other things. And that's all we have for the pattern recognition lecture. Remember to read chapter 4 and complete collaborative quiz 2. Remember that for those, you have to complete your initial post by Wednesday night and make your reply by Sunday night. So go ahead and set your calendars now to make that initial post if you have not already done so. Thanks, and y'all have a good week.